So Marty, the CEO of Blockthrough, is a really good friend of mine. I've known him since my very first startup days in 2013. We started a couple of startups at the same time. If you want to understand perseverance, you want to understand resilience, look no further. I mean, this guy, I think of Marty as effectively like the founder Cockroach. I mean, he cannot be killed. Believe it or not, in 2012, he started his first startup, which failed. A year later, he started a second startup with a co-founder. And then 2 years into that, him and his co-founder, they start to have different visions. They're not really seeing eye to eye, and they just can't get aligned. So Marty decides to actually leave his own startup. He doesn't give up, though. He basically goes and right away starts another one. Finds somebody else working on something in ad tech. He joins forces with him. And, he puts out product after product that doesn't really work. Finally, we're talking now 8 years into his startup career. Finally, he puts out a product that takes off like no other. But he had to take a lot of punches to the face along the way. He had to eat ramen noodles for way too long. And honestly, that's what it sometimes takes. Welcome to the Product Market Fit Show, brought to you by Mistral, a seed stage firm based in Canada. I'm Pablo. I'm a founder turned VC. My goal is to help early stage founders like you find product market fit. Marty, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
So, I've known Marty actually for a long time. We started off in Invest Ottawa in like 2012, 2013. He was running a different business called Micrometrics. I was running Gym Track. And we stayed in touch ever since. After Micrometrics, Marty went off and played around with a few different ideas until he met someone who became his co-founder and kind of went all in on Blockthrough. I ended up actually making a small investment in this company, and I'm really happy. It was my one of one angel investments, which I made before joining Mistral. Yeah, exactly. 100% success rate. I'm an incredible angel investor. But anyway, so I've got, I've had the pleasure in this case of really kind of like seeing the story, more closely than a bunch of the other episodes we do on this show. So I'm quite excited. Today, we're going to talk about a topic we've never really had before. It's quite different. And so the episode is going to be called How to Not Give Up. And honestly, like, Marty's an amazing founder. He's got a bunch of different things going for him. But I always thought one of the most insane kind of things that Marty's got is he will not quit. Like, this guy will go through walls. And so I think I really want to bring this out in this episode because it's obviously, relentlessness is a known important feature for founders. But it's not an easy one. It's not an easy one to get. It's not an easy one to kind of keep hold of. And frankly, it's not even easy to know up to what point, right? Because some things really don't work. So anyways, with all that being said, maybe Marty, we can start like, in just that context, right? When you are, what state you're in, what's going on when you kind of get introduced to your co-founder, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, you gave the background of my time with Micrometrics. Micrometrics was my second business. I'd started a company prior to that, which really is just sort of a footnote. Worked on that for about a year. That was my first company. After working a couple sales jobs straight out of school, first company was not a success. Basically, shut down after about a year, ran out of cash. Went into Micrometrics in 2013. 2015, we sort of were going through a big pivot, had, early signs of product market fit with our first product, Micrometrics, but then, it was clear that there were some elements that we hadn't figured out. And so, without going into exhaustive detail, we're in 2015 going through that big pivot. And, the business was really focused on customer experience solutions for brick and mortar businesses, initially retail. The pivot we were going through was into the hotel space. And I'd sort of made the decision in 2015, that frankly, I didn't find brick and mortar businesses that interesting. Had the opportunity to sell off my shares to my co-founders. And so basically in the summer of early or late spring of summer 2015, I became a free agent. Didn't really have a big win under my belt. And so going into the summer, was exploring a bunch of different ideas. Ended up meeting a brilliant engineer by the name of Chris Piper. And, Piper and I started kicking a few ideas back and forth. He actually had one sort of the kernel of an idea that he'd been working on, which was based in a niche of the online advertising space. He thought he'd figured out a way to deliver ads through ad blockers in a way that could not be blocked. We both found that problem space very interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that we were both previous founders. So we were both past business owners, and we can naturally understand that, the open web is not, it's not free to operate. Publishers on the internet, that make money off ads, they have to pay server fees, they have to pay writers, they have to create content. And, this was pre-ChatGPT, so there was a pretty non-trivial cost to doing that. And so, in order to fund their businesses, they oftentimes need to run advertising. Almost in most cases, that's how they make most of their money. And if publishers aren't able to deliver ads to users, which, ad blockers were preventing, then they just couldn't make money. And so that problem we could relate to, but at the same time, we were both ad block users. And so we could also relate to the user side of it, which is that the vast majority of us ad block users are not militant ad haters. We just, are really annoyed by a handful of obnoxious experiences like, pre-roll ads on YouTube. And we're savvy enough to install a browser extension or, mobile browser to protect ourselves from those worst of the worst kind of experiences. And that's really how Blockthrough came to be.
You're not from the ad tech world, like you weren't, at least before this company. And that's a crazy space. Like it really, it's not a simple one. It's not one that outsiders get. Like I don't get it, to be honest. What were your first steps to figure out whether this was just even how come this isn't solved, right? Like what do you start doing at that point once that kernel comes out?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic because ad tech is a really complicated space. Once you start peeling back the onion, you realize that there's this kind of old boys club of ad tech people that know the space and just keep starting businesses and churning them out. And it can be difficult to break into the space because of how sort of network based it is and how complicated the space is. So certainly that was a little, my first reaction was fuck it, ad tech, I can learn that. And it ended up being more daunting and, than I originally thought. Maybe that naivety was sort of in my favor. But yeah, it really took me a good 2 years before I really understood how all the parts were connected. So it was certainly challenging. And I think that, on the one hand, that was sort of our advantage, is that we didn't see why the problem couldn't be solved. There was a lot of companies that got into the ad blocking, solving for ad blocking space. And what's funny is the people who are most skeptical about the space were ad tech people. I would talk to them and they would say, well, ad block users don't want to see ads. That's why they're blocking them. And that sounded intuitive to them, but to us as ad block users and past business owners, we sort of understood a nuance that was non-obvious to people in the space. Honestly, I think it was kind of to our advantage that we didn't come from the space. I think one of the things we did really well is we surrounded ourselves by people, advisors mostly, who really did understand the space and whom we could learn from. So I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of got
it. Does. What's step one, right? Do you go out and have these sort of discussions, or did you jump in and say all right, let's build it?
I jumped in and said, let's build it. I mean, so to go back to what you're asking, how did we know the problem wasn't solved? We did our research. We did some Google searches on who's working in ad blocking, and we sort of realized that actually there were only 3 or 4 companies that had raised money or a meaningful amount of money. These companies, we could actually look on publishers' websites to see with our ad blockers to see were they doing anything, and some of them were throwing a pop-up that said, please turn off your ad blocker, which frankly speaking, as an ad block user, is a worse experience than showing me ads. So we didn't feel that was really solving the problem. And there was data suggesting that people that those types of solutions didn't work, that users would bounce more often than they would actually respond to that. A lot of sites we went to might have been trying to circumvent ad blockers, but weren't doing it well. And then honestly, the vast majority just weren't doing anything. And so for us, because it was sort of even though it was B2B, it was kind of consumer facing, we could actually just go and check, what do publishers do about this? Go through the top 100 publishers in the US and see, this problem is not solved. And so I think once we got to that point, we kind of looked at the market. We're well, these 2 other companies, have more experience than us and they've raised more money than us. And I think we looked at it and said, well, if we're number 3 in a $1 billion market, then we're, maybe that's a good outcome. Ironically, we ended up buying one of them. So acquiring one of those companies, and then the other one pivoted so many times that they don't do ad blocking anymore. So we actually ended up being the sort of the winner in the space. So it's kind of funny how that played out, but that's sort of how we approached it initially and how we got into it.
So that's the research part. Do you start building something, or do you start calling up publishers? Step two.
So I mean, the answer is both. So Piper, I'm a kind of dive in headfirst kind of guy, and Piper is sort of the same way. So he'd already started building, like before he even met me. He'd encountered the problem on his own, and he had a prototype, and he was just looking for non-technical co-founder to kind of drive this forward. And so basically, I once we said, okay, let's do this, I just started like emailing C-levels at ad tech companies, and probably had a bunch of conversations where I sounded like an idiot. As you know, I'm not afraid to do that. And so, yeah, I think my very first meeting was like with the CEO of a company called OpenX, which at the time was like the third or fourth biggest ad tech company in the US, or on the supply side, at least, servicing publishers. And so I just, was reaching out to random C-levels at ad tech companies, at publishers, and just trying to figure out how the pieces connect.
Yeah, that's my question. Like, was your goal to, like, you were going in these calls to try and sell, or were you going in to try and learn? Got it.
Objective number one was learn, but as a founder, I think most of us who have been in sort of founders who sell kind of roles, we sort of learned that like discovery conversations can turn into sales conversations very easily if you're not a douchebag and you're like fun to talk to. If you tell them about a solution that you're working on and they're like, oh, actually that sounds interesting, then they will buy from you. So I would just try to approach it from a like, hey, I'm a first time ad tech founder, just trying to learn about the space and like we're working on a solution in this space. Just curious, like, is that something that makes sense to you? And some of those conversations turned into buying interest. They didn't turn into paying customers for years, as you know, and as I'm sure we'll find out more later in this episode.
What was the feedback though? Like from 1 to 10, like, oh my God, you need to build this, to like, this is stupid. Like, go back to the drawing board.
Nobody said it was stupid, but a lot of people were skeptical, especially among ad tech. I think publishers were more receptive. So like our actual customer set. So we, for context to people, watching, our product is actually something that a publisher would deploy on their website. And we were talking to ad tech companies to like better understand how the pipes connect and could we partner with them to like use them as distribution channels.
And a publisher, to be clear, is like CNN, right? Like something like that. Like
exactly, yeah. So any website that makes money off ads is a publisher. So CNN is a publisher, but like also you can consider like a Kijiji or an eBay a publisher because they also serve ads in addition to doing e-commerce. So yeah, when I say publisher, that's what I mean. Ad tech people were more skeptical. They didn't seem to understand this nuance of ad block users don't all hate ads. And so a lot of them were just like, oh, well, I don't want my advertisers or ad buying platforms that we work with, like they don't want these users. So like, I don't want to help you here, or like, this is stupid. Publishers, and this is sort of what kept us going, is like, when we talk to publishers, yes, we'd run into one or two who didn't, grasp that nuance, but like being able to explain it from the perspective of like, hey, I'm not an ad tech guy, I'm actually an ad block user who has owned a business before. This is the solution that I would want as a user, and it is going to make you more money. We are only going to bill you a percentage of the money we make you. So for you, it's free money. To publishers, that always made intuitive sense. And I think that was, even though it took us a while to figure out how to connect the pipes, and again, we'll get to that, it was always clear that if we could build it, publishers will want it. It was a no-brainer from a publisher's perspective.
So let's get into that. What you're landing on is almost like this, what I'm calling a bit of an obvious problem. And what I mean by that is, like, I think back to Gym Track, right? Like every few months, somebody will message me and say, hey, I'm building this system to track workouts. And what I gather from that is it's an obvious, like people probably want that if only you could build it. And so far, no one has been able to. I think in a sense, you landed on that in the ad tech world, where from a publisher perspective, it's like, yeah, sure, I'd love to make money off ad block users. Like huge percentage of my base I can't monetize. Of course, I want to monetize them. And it really becomes about, can you actually deliver that? So what's your first approach? I mean, and most people listening here aren't from the ad tech world, so try and keep it as high level as you can, but give us a sense of maybe what that first approach was like.
I'll do my best. I think you put it really well, which is like, it's an obvious problem with a very non-obvious solution. So our initial approach, which I think I hinted at earlier, is that Piper had figured out a way to bypass or circumvent ad blockers in a way that would be extremely difficult to block, or in some cases, next to impossible. And so basically it was like technology that could like defeat the ad blockers. There were a few challenges with this. And again, trying to keep it high level here, but, challenge number one is to really make it, unblockable. You needed the publisher to like basically give you total access to their domain. And so long story short, that's like giving somebody the keys to the castle. And nobody was going to, like CNN was never going to give that to a two-man startup out of Canada. So there was a trust to truly make it like unblockable. There was this trust problem. But secondly, there was the question of like, well, where are we going to get the ads? Even people who aren't ad tech people are aware that there's this notion of, programmatic advertising, like ads that are bought and sold in real time, algorithmically. And so I'm not going to get under the hood there, but like, that would be the best place to get the ads from. There's also direct sold advertising. So publishers will sell ads directly. And then there's like affiliate ads. So there's a few different places we could do it from. Each of these sort of ways of doing it leverages different technologies to be delivered, ad servers, ad networks, ad exchanges. There was a question of like, well, how are we going to do this in a way that's really scalable, but makes the publishers a lot of money? And so between 2015 and when we started the company in 2017, we probably tried 3 or 4 different like ways of doing it. One with affiliate ads, another with these direct sold ads, another, with programmatic advertising. And there was always a sort of technology compatibility issue. And what I mean by that is that ad blockers don't just block the ads, they also block all the secondary technologies that make the ads valuable to buyers. So that could be, cookies for targeting. It could be, attribution technologies that measure whether the ad was seen or whether it was clicked. Or that could be, technologies that actually detect whether it was seen by a real human as opposed to a bot. It's one thing to get what we would consider to be visually the ad to bypass the ad blocker. It's a totally different set of technical problems for each of those secondary technologies. And if you can't restore all of them in real time at all times, then either the ads will not be worth anything, they'll be worth, pennies on the dollar versus the publisher's regular ads, or other non-ad block, environment, or they might be detected as fraud. And this happened a lot to a lot of companies who did ad block circumvention. Google would flag them for fraud, and then all of the money would get clawed back, and the publisher would get slapped on the wrist by Google. And that is potentially, if it's more than a wrist slap, it could be devastating for their business. So there was actually a whole like generation of ad block circumvention solutions like ours that started in that 2015 to 2018 period, and like either flamed out, failed, sold for pennies on the dollar, or ended up, pivoting away.
I mean, that's what I want to dive on, because like that's the interesting piece, is that you made it on the other side, and you gave enough at bats to finally find something that worked. So there's 2 years, right? 2017 to 2015, 2017, you're trying out a bunch of different solutions. None of them are really working. So frustrating, especially from you're like me. I mean, you're not a technical founder, right? You're more of a sales BD type. And so like, you're looking at this like, oh my God, can you just build the thing and then I'll sell it, right? And so like, how do you get through that? Like, first of all, were you funded? I mean, how are you keeping the lights on?
That's a great question. The answer is not really. What I would describe as our like funding at the time, it was like pay as you go financing. So like we would get like an angel check 1 month that would buy us 2 more months. And then like, early on we got like a government grant or 2, and that bought us like another 3 months. We, borrowed against our future shred credits. That bought us another, 3 or 4 months. And so it was really like we between 2015 and late 2018, which is when we raised our first like discrete round, there was sort of this like friends and family / angel / like, small VC writing 100K check kind of like financing. We probably in that time span raised maybe 600 grand over those 2.5 years leading up to that 1.2 million round in September of 2018. And so basically we like stretched out 600 grand or 700 grand in total over those like.
So you're making like a junior sales like salary, like out of school salary, like keep the lights on.
In the best of times. There was
Right.
a lot of moments where I deferred salary. There were a lot of moments where, we had to like pull 25 grand out of our ass to like make payroll. We never missed payroll once during that time span. 2017, when we sort of made our magical pivot, which we'll get to in a second, we were like 6 people. So we had some mouths to feed, but it was always like,
Did you or did you not use your credit card?
many, many times. I think like the good news is that I built up a lot of points. I think I ended up getting like a free flight to Australia to see my sister at some point. But it was a lot of like taking on credit card debt and a lot of shit like that. I had at one point an angel. I was pitching them, and I was telling him our story. This was like as the pivot was starting to work again. We'll get to what that was. He was like, "Marty, you're a cockroach," and I was like, What do you mean?" And he's like, "Oh,
That's my word. That's what I've been saying. 100%.
He's like, you can't be killed. Like you just you keep going." And I think that like I've always sort of viewed it from the perspective of like the longer you stay alive and keep pushing, the higher the probability that like you achieve the success that you're after. And it's true that like if it's a lost cause, like you should cut bait and like move on to something else. But I think in our case, like we talked about, the problem was obvious. Over time, we were still checking publisher sites. When I was selling to a publisher, I'd go on their site, I'd see they're not using anything, or I'd see they're using a competitor, and I'd ask them like, "How's it going?" And they're like, "Oh, it sucks. Like we got flagged for fraud. Like we're shutting them down." And so I knew, like from my conversations in market, from looking at what publishers were using, that the problem remained unsolved. And so 28, to go back to 2017, like what. In that time span between 2015 when we started the company and 2018 when we found product market fit, we never had more than like 4 months of cash in the bank. And so, 2017, I'm like 2 years in, and like this is like it's kind of getting to me. Am I gonna whiff on number 3, and then like how do I go raise money for number 4 if I didn't even get to like revenue with my third business? Like holy shit, that's a bad signal to investors.
Is that what keeps you going? That's what I want to dive into a little bit. Like, what do you have to tell yourself to keep going when you're pitching like on the one side, you're like, your product's not really working, you got 4 months of runway, you're not really making any money, you're pitching an investor, and I'm sure every, 9 out of 10 of them are telling you, just do something else. Cause just probably what they would say a year and a half in, and you got to be like, no, I'm going to keep going.
9 out of 10 no's was a good week.
That's it. So what narrative are you giving yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on it there. It's like, one part was like we knew the problem was still not solved. We knew that publishers still wanted the product. They wanted a product that could do this. And lastly, it was like I was on startup number 3. I was approaching my mid-30s, desperately didn't want to go and get a job. And to go back to all my, the few investors that we did have were like friends and people who trusted us when, because they believed in us as people, not because the business was doing, well performance-wise. And I think that like that desire to not have to go back to them and be like, yeah, we failed and we never made a dollar, that like the like prospective shame was a big motivator. It was, I wanted people to like, feel like they made a good bet by investing in Marty and in Blockthrough. If we had failed, if we'd shut the doors in mid 2017, that was not the case. That would have been a pretty embarrassing way to go out. For me, at least.
And let me ask you this, actually, the flip side of that question, because that's okay. People invested in you already, and you believe in yourself, and you don't want to be a failure. Let's summarize it like that. How do you, in 2017, raise new money? Like, how do you put yourself in the mindset of talking to somebody and being confident, which is what you have to do to raise even 25K? Or
by 2017, we built, this whole time, even though we didn't have a product. Even though like we had like iterations of the product that didn't work, I was selling the whole time. I was still talking to publishers. You fall flat on your face once or twice, and you might you might feel like you've burnt a bridge. But like if nobody still solved the problem, then like you can keep going back to them when you finally figure it out. And so I was basically raising on like, hey, we've got this big pipeline, we've got this many millions of dollars in like customers that have signed a contract and like are still waiting for a product. And like, there's still no solution to market. And hey, I didn't raise $1 million on that, but it allowed me to string together. I think we got one check in that was 6 figures, and like that bought us 4 months, and it was a lot of like stringing stuff together based on like, hey, there's sales traction, and like the product makes sense intuitively. We just haven't figured out how to connect the pipes. And
you weren't playing games in a sense. Like you had true belief in this. You felt like you weren't there yet, but you really did believe that.
100%. I felt like we could do it. I felt like nobody had figured it out yet, but we could get there. And so maybe I'll jump to like what what that was.
Well, let's do that. This is a happy story. I mean, you end up getting acquired, and everybody everybody was more than happy to have invested with you. So what does happen in this kind of 2018 period that starts to turn
So
things
yeah,
around?
so the turnaround kind of begins in 2017. That like period of peak frustration. We're trying to make this tech work. There are challenges with like when you're hiding from the ad blockers, you have to do all sorts of funky technical stuff to get the ads through. And I sort of had this realization. I think I was like getting drunk at a bar after a conference with a publisher. He told me about the biggest ad blocker out there is a company called IO. So they own AdBlock Plus, a few others. And he told me that they had this acceptable ads initiative that they were working on with a bunch of publishers and search engines. And the notion was that they kind of arrived at the same conclusion as us, but from the other side, right? So they had all these users using their ad blocker for free, and they sort of realized that most of their users, based on research that they did, most of their users were willing to see some kind of light ad experience. And they'd sort of define this acceptable ad standard, which was basically a lighter ad standard that the majority of their users would tolerate. And so their business model was that they would go around to the Googles of the world, the search engines and the social networks, and say, hey, if you can make sure that your ads adhere to this standard and you pay us a fee, we feel comfortable letting those ads through to our users. And so basically they'd had very mixed success with that by 2017. So when I say mixed, what I mean is that they'd had near universal success with the social networks and the search engines. So Google was using it, LinkedIn was using it, Amazon.com was using it, Yahoo.com. So they had a lot of uptake, but we noticed that none of the publishers we were trying to sell to, which were publishers in the open web, the CNNs of the world and the like, none of them were using acceptable ads to monetize their users. And we simultaneously thought that was kind of weird and potentially an opportunity for us, because if we didn't have to hide the ads from the ad blocker, then there was no issue with making these secondary technologies work. And then we just needed to make sure that the ads actually met this acceptable ad standard. So long story short, it would get us out of the cat and mouse world where we need to hide stuff. And we could then focus on how do we filter the ads to make them light enough that the ad blockers trust us and won't block our stuff.
Why did it work with the search engines? Why was IO able to do it with the search engines but not directly?
So it's a great question, and it boils down to like the unique thing that we invented. So search engines and social networks tend to be what are called walled gardens. So that means that they don't allow third-party ad buying on their sites. They have their own, ad buying platform like Facebook, for example, or Google. You're buying ads through Facebook or Google. You're not buying them through AdRoll or some other third-party ad buying platform. And so the result is that they have total control over the quality of the ads that appear on their sites. Publishers in the open web are not walled gardens. They do not have control over the quality of ads. They are serving ads that are basically bought and sold on these ad exchanges, and they basically run an auction amongst all the ad exchanges that they work with. And those ad exchanges have dozens of ad buying platforms bidding on each ad through their pipes. And the result is that they have virtually zero quality control over the ads. Are they animated? Are they video? Are they just a static image? And one of the major requirements of acceptable ads is no video and no animated ads. And so nobody had, basically a publisher, even if they wanted to work with acceptable ads, they couldn't use programmatic advertising because they had no way of ensuring that the ads met those standards. What our unique realization was, or our unique solution was that unique insight is the word I'm looking for, is that we could leverage the latest technology that publishers were using for online advertising to basically filter the ads. We could scan them and filter them in real time. And so we basically invented the first solution that could actually deliver programmatic advertising to ad block users and monetize at similar rates as non-ad block ads. And so as I think we launched that in March of 2018. So when we launched it, we had 28 days of cash left in the bank. So this is fucking 2.5 years in. We're limping across the finish line. I mean, we don't know that we've limped across the finish line, right? We're just we're launching iteration number 4. I'm sure this is going to fail for some reason I haven't foreseen. And basically we go $100 in revenue the first month, $1,000 the second month, $10,000 the third month, $20,000 the fourth month, $48,000, $96,000.
That's when I
Yeah,
invested,
exactly.
by the way. That email. I think it was like the 40 to 100. I'm like, this is nuts. I gotta call this guy out.
And it was crazy, right? And that's the funny thing is like you don't realize that you've hit product market fit until you're like 3 or 4 months in, right? Because like you're doing $100 a month in revenue, $1,000 a month in revenue, like that's great growth, but like those are small numbers. It doesn't even pay one person's salary. So like, even 2 months in, we're at like, end of April, and we still don't know if this is working or not. We're just like, I guess like it's still going to fail for some reason we haven't thought of. Of course, once you get to like 50 or 100K a month in 6 or 7 months, it's like you're like, all right, we got something here. We actually ended up getting AdBlock Plus's parent company, so IO. They ended up investing in us in late 2018. That's how they saw our growth happening, and they're like, this is crazy. Like, we're going in on this company. And so they ended up acquiring us late last year. And of course, you know the story, very good outcome. I think our average investor return was like 8.5x. Our very first investor did like 25x, a friend from high school. So he got rewarded for believing in us.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think we can kind of really end it there. Maybe my last question, you kind of touched on it, but maybe there's a bit more depth, and I tend to finish with the question always, which is, when did you really know that you had product market fit?
I mean, it was probably like end of Q2. Like, right. So we launched in March. So March we did 100. April we did 1,000. May we did 10,000. So yeah. So I think June is like, okay, like we did 10. Like we really need to hit 20 this month. Like, and if we do it, then we're there. And I remember there was this investor in the Valley, his name like Go Cool or something like that, and he's like a big name angel. And I pitched him the end of the year before. I was like, and he sounded super interested, and then he like pulled down. He's like, message me once you hit 20K a month. And so I messaged him that month because he said he'd write us a big check. And then he was like, well, like, I've kind of moved up market. Message me when you hit, 40. And so the next month I wrote him, I was like, we hit 40. Like, are you? And he still kept pulling. He still found a reason not to go, but it was kind of fun.
Well, it's funny. Like, ad tech was so just looked down upon by VCs. Like, you just can't get, for whatever reason, like a great exit in the space and whatever. And I think that was part of it. But yeah, ultimately you ended up doing it. I mean, virtually bootstrapped. You raised, angel funding. I think in total you would raise maybe 2 million.
Yeah, I think it was almost exactly 2 million in total.
That's incredible. Well, anyways, we'll stop it there. I appreciate you kind of sharing all that. I think we delivered on the planned kind of topic here, which is just how to not give up. Like, this is what relentlessness really looks like, right? It's 4 months of cash, a month of cash for years, and basically no salary, some salary, credit card debt, just crazy things, right? But if you think that you're solving something real and it's just a matter of a bit more time, often it's worth it. And I would argue the best founders have this characteristic, and that's what, and actually, if I just zoom out a second, we're just talking about Blockthrough, right? Like, you had failed startup number 1, call it mixed startup number 2. This was number 3. Like, this is almost a decade of relentlessness, right? But it just takes shots at bat at some point.
It was 12 years from first startup to first exit.
Incredible.